I'm standing alone in a crowded room and we're not speaking. And I'm dying to know, is it killing you like it's killing me? Yeah. I don't know what to say since a twist of fate when it all broke down. And the story of us looks a lot like a tragedy now. I seriously wonder if the oppression from UMG might actually improve my videos here. Because I have to spend more time explaining, less time showing.
And this is a problematic little scripture. We go to John 8, verses 3 to 11, where it says this. Now the scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman caught at adultery, and after standing her in their midst, they said to him,
Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of committing adultery. In the law, Moses prescribed for us to stone such sort of women. What really do you say?
Of course, they were saying this to put him to the test in order to have something with which to accuse him. But Jesus bent down and began to write with his finger in the ground. When they persisted in asking him, he straightened up and he said to them, Let the one of you that is sinless be the first to throw a stone at her. And bending over again, he kept on writing in the ground. But those who heard this began going out, one by one, starting with the older men, and was...
So anyway, he was writing in the ground. This is the stone the bitch section. The law, God's law, says stone the bitch. Jesus says don't... Jesus doesn't directly say that's wrong. He says, alright, well, the one of you that doesn't have any sin, go ahead and stone her. So he's obviously, he's disagreeing. He's reversing what stupid people would think is God's law. God's law has a purpose, right? So it's kind of whatever, but the law says stone the bitch. Jesus says don't stone the bitch, you crazy bastards. So here we have an example of somebody using some discernment. Like God's law has a purpose, right? It's not simple. It's not simple that if you bash the head in of anybody who breaks the law, then everything will be great. It's not that simple, right? I just want to focus on he's writing on the ground. When Adam and Eve were thrown out of the garden, they're gonna have to work the ground. The ground is cursed because of you. You have to work the ground. The Son of Man that raises the vast apostate army in Ezekiel has a inkhorn on his side. The pen is mightier than the sword, right? So here we have Jesus riding on the ground. Ezekiel's guy has an inkhorn on his side. The four artisans. 4 is a symbol, numeric symbol for creation. Madonna and her rain video. Whatever. Something about my hand. With my hand I can write. Natasha Bedingfield. I don't need a dictionary because I can spell. All Jesus writing on the ground here. Why is he writing on the ground? Because he's writing. He's a writer. Jesus takes his finger, writes on the ground here. The Son of Man that is raising the vast apostate army in Ezekiel has an inkhorn on his side. At his side. He's carrying ink. Screw it, I'm gonna put in UMG, you take this down, I'm gonna fucking kill you. There's a death threat for you. I'm gonna put those two video clips in here. Go ahead, I dare you to DMCA this. Crisis of Conscience, page 66. We're on page 66. On another occasion, he related that Judge Rutherford, later in his presidency, made it a firm policy that the Watchtower magazine would carry only articles that stress prophecy over the preaching work. So prophecy and preaching work. Rutherford's the one that made that your religion all about that. The end is super soon, that's why we need to do this. Gotta do it, get more cult members. And nothing else, we don't really care about teaching, we don't care about developing people, we don't care about doing anything. Teaching anybody anything. All you gotta know, everybody's gotta know the truth. We don't even bother telling you what the fuck that is. You just need to know that the prophecy says we need to do it because the end is super soon, so we need to preach. For that reason, a period of years passed in which the articles and subjects as love, kindness, mercy, long-suffering, and similar qualities did not appear in the magazine. Thus, during the nearly 6-year period of the presidencies of Russell and Rutherford, each man acting according to his own prerogative and exercising his presidential authority with no hint of a governing body. In 1993, the organization produced a new history book titled Jehovah's Witnesses Proclaimers of God's Kingdom, replacing a previous work titled Jehovah's Witnesses in the Divine Purpose. It seems evident the various points of the book seek to counter the effects of information that appeared in the first publishing of recent years, including the original 1983 printing of this book, Crisis of Conscience, in 1991 printing of its sequel, In Search of Christian Freedom, and in Carl Olaf Johnson's book, The Gentile Times Reconsidered, which first appeared in 1983. So, 1983. So these books came out in 1983. The Watchtower took a decade to respond with the Proclaimer's book. It was definitely a response to these books. Certain facts were admitted for the first time in this new history book, perhaps with the view of muting the effects of its members, if its members were to become aware of them through other sources. At its start, the book editors assure readers their endeavors to be objective and to provide a candid history. The vast majority of Jehovah's Witnesses have no access to the records of the past and no personal knowledge of the events relating to the organization's development. So they don't know where they don't know where their own religion came from. And that's very important. That's pretty much the main problem, main reason. They don't know where it came from. They've rewritten history. They don't have any way to check anything. Especially they can't read apostate books, so if the organization just says crazy shit like we predicted World War I, that's not true. That's not even close to true. Jehovah's Witnesses have no way to know that. The operations of the central authority structure or of the men forming that inner authority structure are likewise unknown to them. They don't have no idea who made their shit. They don't have any names associated with any of their shit. They are thus essentially at the mercy of the editors of this 1993 publication's supposedly impartial candid history. And candid history is in quotation marks there. I have seldom read more sanitized or less objective presentation. Its depiction of organizational history and policy paints a picture that differs measurably from reality. This is the case in its discussion of the presidencies of both Russell and Rutherford. They just made shit up. They're lying in the Proclaimer's book about the nature of the organization. With regard to the identification of the faithful and wise servant of Matthew 24, 45 through 47, this book finally acknowledges on pages 142, 143, and 626 that for a number of years the Watchtower magazine did indeed set forth the view that Charles Taze Russell was the chosen faithful and wise servant, and that from 1896 on, Russell himself acknowledged the apparent reasonableness of this view. It does not acknowledge the fact that Russell not only viewed him as reasonable, that application to an individual himself, as the specially chosen faithful and wise servant, but that in the very Watchtower, the book's list and its footnotes, he actually argued for it as true scriptural application rather than the position he had taken back in 1881. Rather than acknowledge this, the new history book misleadingly continues to place emphasis on Russell's 1881 statement in which he applied the figure to the entire body of Christ. The book does not inform its readers that in the October 1st, 1909 issue of the Watchtower, Russell describes as his opponents those who would apply the term faithful and wise servant to all the members of the Church of Christ. So you just, notice saying this phenomena of saying everything, even when you're contradicting yourself, just taking the reasonable position every single time and just letting it switch. No matter what the circumstance, you can always say, no matter what you bring up, if you have most arguments or discussions with Jehovah's Witnesses are one sentence long, or you make a claim, say something to them, and then they have a response to it, and then that's the end. If it doesn't end there, then they fucking run, because they always have at least the first response. Say this organization was started by a guy who, that he was the chosen one and he was the faithful and wise servant. That's a concept associated with the organization. They'll say, no, it wasn't. And then they'll point at the 1881 statement where Russell says whatever. But then you can't. There's always a one-liner in response to anything. And that one-liner always has. They could say the opposite in a different circumstance. I can't think of good examples now, but just. As long as you limit debate or information sharing into very, very small bites, you can always have a good response to any attack. That's kind of the way the organization works in a lot of ways. Lots of people have had arguments with Jehovah's Witnesses. Very few of them have had long arguments with Jehovah's Witnesses. Give the canned answer. If you don't respond well to the canned answer, then you're a shithead and they get away from you. That's the way it works. Or they kill you. They get you away from them, or they get away from you. Because not accepting the canned answer, or claiming that the canned answer is like somehow wrong, they just don't do that. They just don't play that game. Nor does it tell its readers the special issue of the Watchtower of October 16, 1916 states that while not openly claiming the title, Russell admitted as much in private conversation. And while acknowledging finally that for years after his death, the Watchtower magazine itself promoted the view of Russell as that servant, the book gives the reader no idea of the insistence with which this was done, as in stating that everyone having a knowledge of God's divine plan must truthfully admit that he derived that knowledge from studying the Bible in connection with what Brother Russell wrote, and that before such time he did not even know that God had a plan of salvation. It's where the whatever. Remember, where did you learn scriptural truths? Who are you to Who are you to question us if we're the one that taught you in the first place? Russell had the same kind of attitude. Or those describing any of those questioning any of Russell's teaching as having rejected the Lord because of rejecting his special servant. Likewise, it does not explain the paradox created when, by the Watchtower owns teaching, on one hand, the present-day teaching of 1919, Jesus Christ definitely selected, approved, and identified a faithful and wise servant class, and then on the other hand, the fact that the very same year, 1919, and for years thereafter, the very one supposedly chosen believed the faithful and wise servant was not a class but an individual, Charles Taze Russell, selected many decades before 1914 as a reigning Christ who had become present since 1874. Effort is made on pages 220-221 of the Watchtower's new history book to deny that the second president, Joseph F. Rutherford, sought to gain full and total control of the organization. A quotation from Karl Klein is presented to show that him as actually an essentially humble man, childlike in prayer to God. So the asshole that took over, who through a legal maneuver was able to take over completely, even though the people on the board were opposing him, or they disagreed with him unilaterally doing everything, he got rid of him. He's a humble man, childlike in prayer to God. He used a legal maneuver, whatever, because a lawyer was able to figure out that he could do that and win if they got into a legal debate, a legal fight. Humble man? It's like Hitler. Yet the historical record demonstrates that anyone, including any member of the board of directors or of those in the editorial committee who expressed disagreement with Rutherford, was quickly eliminated from whatever organizational position that person occupied. One has only to talk with others who were at the headquarters during his presidency to know that the picture of humility conveyed by Karl Klein does not conform to the reality, and that, to all intents and purposes, the judge's word was law. I was actively associated with the organization during the last 5 years of his presidency, and know the clear effect the man had upon me and the viewpoint that I was expressed. Most witnesses today have not had that experience. But God's Son said that out of the heart the mouth speaks, and that by your words you will be justified or judged. I believe that anyone who simply reads the material found in the Watchtower magazine from the 1920s on through 1942 can clearly see the spirit not of humility but of dogmatism and authoritarianism the articles breathed. The articles admittedly written principally by Rutherford. Deprecating, even harsh language was employed against any who dared to question any position, policy, or teaching that came forth from the organization of which he was the head and which he wrote. It's like just kind of one guy asserting that anybody who disagrees with him is a big shithead that God hates. On the same pages of the book, Jehovah's Witnesses, Proclaimers of God's Kingdom, effort is made to demonstrate that Rutherford was not looked upon by the membership as their leader. The Catholics would say their leader is the Pope. We don't have a leader. His personal denial of such position, made in 1941 just before his death, is quoted as proof. The caption beneath the photo shown on the next page was placed there by the writers of the Watchtower history book. The words are there, but the facts are not. While many of the Watchtower adherents viewed Christ as their invisible leader, the fact they did look upon Rutherford as their visible earthly leader, contrary to Christ's injunction at Matthew 23:10, neither be called leaders, for your leader is one, the Christ. Rutherford cannot fail to have known that the membership viewed him in that light. Alright.